on, guys? It's Mike again from BavhausTV, and today in the shop we have an E90 328i. This is an X-Drive car, so XI, I refer to it that way throughout this video. I just call them 328 XIs. Anyways, we have a pretty bad wheel bearing drone coming from the left rear, so we're gonna do a couple things. First thing is gonna be showing you guys what it sounds like. I took a video before we brought it in of driving on the highway. You guys might be able to hear the drone there. Maybe Justin can enhance that audio. Just in case that doesn't work, we're gonna do it on the lift quick. I'm gonna show you guys what it sounds like in the shop underneath the car, and then we're gonna go and show you why this is gonna be a little bit of a different way to address doing the wheel bearing, because as you can see, we have a bunch of salt up here because we're in the Northeast, so a lot of the northern cars in the rear, right where the BMW rondelle is, collect water behind the rondelle on the wheels. It completely corrodes and eats the axle nut that you need to take out in order to do the wheel bearing. So in this case, we're gonna be replacing the entire rear hub with an axle. We got a junkyard corner pretty much here that we're gonna disassemble and then reassemble inside the car. So we're gonna show you what it sounds like first. We're gonna show you what the issue is and why we can't just change the wheel bearing. And then we're gonna show you guys how to go about changing the entire rear dropout pretty much. So let's get to it. Alright, so this is the rondelle center cap that I was talking about that takes water on. These aren't the stock wheels for the car, but sort of like a stock set of wheels for an F30. Alright, and that reveals our axle nut. Let's give you guys a closer view of what used to be our axle nut. So as you can see, there's really nothing there left to grab onto. This looks like it sat at the bottom of the ocean for a couple hundred years. It's crazy how bad some of these get. Some of them don't get bad at all, and then others look like this. And if you look, it's actually like rust welded all together. So the hub, the nut itself, and the axle are pretty much one piece, and I don't see any way we're gonna remove that.
Looks like an Aztec ruin.
Yeah, it looks like it is part of the Titanic.
Looks like an aerial view of Pompeii.
Alright, so normally this is the axle nut, and as you can see, it's not that anymore. It's normally supposed to be a 36 millimeter. If I go try to put it on, I just get decay coming out. So I'm really not even gonna try. But let's show you guys what our solution's gonna be. Alright, so what we're gonna do first is actually remove the caliper, the rotor. Actually, we can leave the rotor on because this is just gonna go in the junk pile too. We have a new rotor that's gonna go on. You're doing this the same way. You're gonna keep your rotor, so remove it here after you take the caliper off, or break that first, then take the caliper off. We're gonna get the knuckle off with all this, disconnect all the control arms because we're gonna leave the control arms on the car, and then take the shock out and the parking brake, a couple other things. Oh, so we will take the rotor off because the parking brake is behind it, and then we're gonna take the axle out of the differential. So the first thing we're gonna do is go in between the fins of the rotor and the caliper. I'm just gonna push that caliper piston back, go both ways. I'll loosen up the caliper. Okay. So now your pad should be pretty far off. We're gonna go behind and remove the caliper with a 16 millimeter socket. All right, so we're gonna get the caliper bracket off. And since we're gonna be putting the caliper back on, we just need to remove the whole caliper as is. We don't need to take the bracket off. That's why we're doing these two and not those two up there. I normally like to leave one of these bolts in a little bit so the caliper doesn't move so much. There we go. And there's our caliper. We can just bring that guy right back here. And let's go back to the front and get the rotor off. All right, now we just need to remove the rotor. Just removing this screw. We have a parking brake on, so we're gonna go drop the parking brake. Now we're gonna give a few taps. The rotor itself, try to free it up from the parking brake and the hub. You see this hub is pretty rusted itself. All this rust right there is actually where I was welding up the rotor and keeping it from coming off. All right, so in order to remove the parking brake cable, we're gonna have to remove the shoes. So starting with these pieces right here, we're going to remove the 2 shoe retainer springs on either side. And that's gonna give us a little bit of wiggle room to remove the springs and the adjuster up top. So this is an automatic, so these shoes aren't too used up. But normally what I like to do is try to find a way to get some tension off these springs. And then should be able to get behind this one in the corner. Kind of pull it through. Okay, like that. That's that spring. And we can get the adjuster out. Remember, this piece is that way, and there's actually a line here, someone painted it. Now we need to get our bottom spring, which should be way easier. If I can see it. Okay, well, got it. Be careful not to shatter your shoes. Just happened. That's the other spring. And then just put it back together roughly so you know which way everything goes. I'm gonna open this up like this, and then unhook the claw from the back of the cable there. And we can put that aside. All right, so this is the parking brake cable from the front, and now we just need to go remove hex bolt in the rear and pull it through. So back here you have this little retaining bracket that keeps this from coming out, and it's held in by a 5mm hex or Allen key. What we're gonna do is put it in, make sure it's in there really good. Let me just ratchet quick, make sure it's in there good, and then we're gonna break it free. Ours ended up being pretty easy to break free. Now I'm just gonna loosen it up. Okay, so we can remove that, and then our bracket. I'm gonna have to go probably back up to the front and now PB blast this and condense it out the back. All right, we're gonna spray PB blaster up here. I'm gonna go behind and do the same. We're gonna just move this little grommet a little bit so it comes up off the metal, frees up a little bit. All right. Now coming from behind, so we found the best way to remove this is to grab a pair of pliers and shake back and forth. You're gonna feel it break free, and you're gonna separate the e-brake cable from this piece here. So this piece is actually what sits and connects to the inside of the spindle. That's what makes it difficult for it to come straight out. So you can see a little marring, but nothing too crazy. You bite it here and turn it, and it'll make it easy for it to come out. That's what the hole looks like after. You can see there's quite a bit of corrosion in there. So that actually came out pretty easy, all things considered. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is remove the axle from the differential. I'm gonna use an impact to make easy work of this. All right, so those are the axle bolts. So basically I'm just gonna put an E14 on a wobble socket and then a long extension. We're gonna get that hooked up. Okay, and then I'm going to use my 1/2" impact on air. And the reason I'm using air is for breakaway torque, and the reason I use breakaway torque is because I already removed the rotor, which normally I would stick something to block the wheel from spinning with the caliper through the rotor, and also I removed the e-brake cable already, which would also assist in us being able to break this free, because right now what's going to happen is I'm going to go to loosen it, and I'm actually going to turn the axle rather than turn the bolt trying to remove. So breakaway torque will assist in that. All right, that's the first one. We're gonna turn it and just do all 6. We'll show you that from underneath. All right, so now we're just gonna turn by the hub and get all 6 of these out. Okay, that one's holding on, so we're gonna skip it. I'm gonna go back to that one. I don't know why that one was not coming off. All right, we just need the compressor to charge up a little bit, so we went back to that second one that wasn't coming off. Okay, so 3 done. Should be 3 more to go. Okay, next one's the last one. All right, so now we're gonna go underneath and remove all of these. Normally I would say replace these, but we actually didn't get any. We're going to be reusing them, but luckily these look in good condition and removing them was easy. Like come out here easiest. All right. So you can see the axles removed from the diff. So now we can go back up and start removing our control arms to get the knuckle out. All right, so we're gonna remove the sway bar and link from the sway bar first. So the 16 millimeter. And if it starts spinning, you're gonna need a 17 millimeter on the other side to actually counter hold it. All right, so it's actually one of those skinny ones where you can't fit a 17 out, so we're just gonna use vice grips. The only thing about using vice grips is make sure they're on right the first time, or you're gonna compromise the seal on the boot, and then you're gonna need a new sway bar and link. So just make sure it's tight. I'm gonna jam it up against the control arm, and then we can start removing 16 millimeter nut. Okay, and we're good, no problem. So we can just slide that out now and move it to the side. And then what I'm gonna do is actually kind of lift up a little bit on the sway bar because I need to get to this bolt right back here. So we're gonna do that next. All right, so we need to remove this upper control arm back here, and in order to get to the bolt off the knuckle, we're gonna have to move the sway bar in the rear a little bit. So it's a 10 millimeter here. We're just gonna loosen this up and give it a little bit of room to wiggle around, take some of the tension off. Might not even remove the bolts entirely, we'll see in a second. Let me go get a ratcheting wrench. So we got a 10 mil now. A wrench on there. It's just enough for me to get a ratcheting wrench on. Okay. Again, I'm not really planning on removing this. I just need to make enough room to move this guy around, which I think I might have achieved that. But let's see. Might be able to get away with taking these bolts out completely. Actually pretty long. All right, let's see if we can get to that bolt. All right, so now we can lift this sway bar out of the way enough to get an 18 millimeter on. And then now we're just gonna hit it with the impact. We're gonna have to hit it with the real impact. Okay, that's one down. That's what the bolt looks like, threaded all the way through. Next, we're going after this control arm. The bolt for it is right here. A little hard angle to get at. Remove this one now. That one's a little bit longer, it looks like. Maybe it's not, maybe we're just delusional. But this is the first one we removed. This is now the second one. And the reason we're removing it from the spindle and not the rear subframe is because the alignment's actually dictated by some of the inside ones here. So all you have to do when you remove them from the knuckle is just torque them under load. So we're just gonna put the car on blocks, torque it, and then we know everything's gonna be all right. Or you can jack it up to the correct height. A lot of people do, and that can also work. All right, so now we have 2 out, and I think we have 2 more to go, the 2 lower ones. So let's now disconnect the ABS sensor here. We're gonna do that from pretty much the rear. All right, so next we're going to get this 5 millimeter hex out. Be sure to get it in good. And this is to remove the ABS sensor. Sometimes these come out easy. The older chassis, before E9X, these are a pain. But something about the E90s, E92s, even when they're lasting, they come out pretty easily. Not sure if it's like a change in the metal they use, but it's no big deal. The sensor itself you gotta be a little careful with, but the way I normally get them to break free is by taking a chisel and not on the side where the sensor is, but the side where the mount is. Give it a few taps, you can see it start to spin free, and then you should be able to kind of get behind it. Okay. A little pry bar in here, and just like that, get the sensor out. That's what the sensor looks like. Wouldn't be a bad idea to clean it while you got it here because you can see all that build up on it. So we'll clean that before we reinstall. But for now we can just push it to the side. And next thing we're gonna remove is this control arm here. All right, 18 millimeter here. That one's under a lot of spring tension, so just make sure you're ready for that. And these are all the same bolt actually, so not to be too specific, but I like to put things back where I take them from, so I'm gonna make sure they go back in their respective place. Next thing we're gonna remove, oh, actually I said shock earlier. The shock is actually connected to the lower control arm, which is saying, so we don't have to touch the shock, so scratch that. The next one we have to remove is this lower control arm over here, and then we're gonna do the big trailing arm. All right, so this one's actually bolted, so you're gonna need to support the bolt with the wrench. Just need to get on the bolt, support the nut. Okay. What I like to do to remove bolts is take this, and you can just pull it out like that. if it doesn't want to come out easy like that, as you hit the gun, just add some tension like that and it'll come out. All right, so only one more left, and that's this big one here. I think it's 21 or 22 millimeter. All right, last one is the lower. It's a big 21. I'm gonna go put my body against this so it doesn't fall out. This is what I was talking about earlier. So we're gonna put that 21 behind here and let it kind of come out. All right, let's pull this thing out. All right, and there we go. You can actually hear the wheel bearing. That's pretty bad.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, but look, that's pretty much the entire piece that we need to remove. Aside from the sway bar end link here, which we just have to remove there, this is all going in the scrap pile, and we're just gonna take an entire donor assembly and put it in. All right, so it's actually a day later. We did have an axle hub assembly yesterday, but our junkyard unfortunately sent us the right rear, and aside from the axle maybe, none of it's gonna be interchangeable. They said they would have it for us yesterday, they didn't, so it ended up taking until today for us to get it, but we have it. We just completely disassembled it, and the only thing I put back on from our old setup is our sway bar end link, because they just cut the one from the junkyard. But otherwise, you're just gonna disassemble this the same way as the one that you disassembled inside the car, because you're just putting a direct replacement in. As you can see, now we have an axle nut, so if we need to repair anything in here, we can. Our dust shield was pretty badly beaten from the junkyard, kind of per usual. We had to bend it back, so that's why it doesn't look too great. But as long as our rotor's not hitting it, we'll deal with it later or just live with it. But yeah, let's get this thing inside. All right, so we're gonna move the sensor out of the way. We're gonna take the parking brake, put it under the camera arm, and I think that should be all right. All right, so what we're gonna do is pretty much try to get these two lower ball joints or bushings into these spots here, while we feed the axle through underneath the rear sway bar, over the exhaust, using the exhaust kind of as place to get leverage. I'm just gonna start fitting things in. So I got the big 21 millimeter lined up. I'm gonna take my bolt, get that through, get the knot on just to have it there. Cool. All right, I'm gonna lift. Just going into place. All right, it's actually not bad. That's gonna be the one that's nut and bolt. All right, I accidentally kicked it away. We're gonna take the 18 millimeter one from the back. Same deal. Get this thing in. We're just getting these into place. We're not tightening anything yet. I'm gonna get everything lined up first. Take my parking brake cable and put it back in, at least into the spot that it's gonna be in. I don't have to be putting it in completely yet. I did replace this control arm because ours was bad. I'm not sure if we showed that, but this inner bushing was blown, so we just took one from the assembly from the junkyard. So now what I'm gonna do is start attaching my toe arm and then these upper two control arms. They all have the same size bolt. I'm actually gonna use the ones from the junkyard because they're a little bit cleaner than the ones we removed. All right, so we're going to put this one in next, which I'm hitting something somewhere. I think it's my axle. Yeah, that's what it is. Okay, so we have to make sure the axle's as far back as it will go so that we can feed this through here. Okay. And I'm gonna get this guy hand started. These are very easy to cross thread since everything's cast. So just make sure that you're putting it in by hand first. See, I think that's even on an angle. So get this in correctly. I think like that. Yeah, there we go. So you can see it's nice and easy. If you feel any resistance putting these in, you're probably cross-threading them. And I would go stop what you're doing, go check, make sure everything's good before you continue. Because once you screw this up, you're gonna need another spindle. All right, once you verify that you got it in correctly, just follow through with the ratchet. And these three can go all the way in. Just don't get them all the way torqued up. We're gonna kind of create a underload situation and then kind of get everything under torque when we're wrapping this up. But first we want to just get everything connected. Okay, right there, I'll stop. Gonna clean this sensor off. We can get the sensor back in. All right, you can use some brake cleaner or something. I'm just using electronics cleaner. I tend to use it on anything electronic, but it shouldn't matter too much here. And it's definitely a good habit to clean these while you have them out. Plug that guy right back in and get our little grub screw back in. So this is just a 5mm hex, and this is the longer grub screw out of the two. The other little one you have is going to end up being for the e-brake retainer or parking brake retainer. This doesn't need to be crazy tight, so we're just going to give it a little quarter turn after we feel they get tight. We can just leave that alone. Next, let's do the two control arms up top. All right, so next up is the left forwardmost control arms. So that's the one right there, the one that we had to move the sway bar out of the way for. So we're going to get our bolt back in, and then we're just gonna adjust it and start tightening it back into the knuckle. And again, with this, we want to just be very sure that we're getting in straight. These should be a little bit easier to get in straight because they're not under a ton of like spring tension like this one was. So you can kind of move them around safely without any substantial issue. Biggest thing is just getting an 18 on there. So let's see if I can turn it a few times with my ratcheting wrench. Very sure to watch where this is mating to the spindle. If you see it pushing off, you know you're cross-threading it. All right, cool. So now let's do the top control arm. And now to do the top one, I'm just gonna line that up back here, and we're gonna come from the other side and tighten this up the same way. Again, just start it by hand and then finish it up with a wrench or something you can feel. I see this one's being a little stubborn. All right, cool. So next thing we're gonna do, let's go back underneath and get our axle bolts back in. All right, so next I'm going to line up the axle and start hand starting these axle bolts back in. I like to put them in with the washers if possible. Gonna get them hand started, turn it, get all 6 in, and we're actually gonna leave them loose until we get the rotor back in, because we're gonna use the rotor with the caliper on it. That's a way to hold the axle from spinning while we turn the torque wrench on these bolts. It's 2. Okay, that's 4. Let's get the last 2 in. All right, and now I'm just gonna put a long extension in, and we're just gonna get them all seated up nice so that all we have to do is torque them when we're ready. All right, and that's it. All right, next I'm going to put the retainer back on the parking brake cable. So just put that bracket over, thread in that 5mm hex. All right, not too tight. Now let's go back to the other side and put the parking brake together. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is pull the cable through a little bit. Push that grommet back down in. The grommet's a little bit of a seal, so we wanna kind of put that back in a little bit. All right, like that. And then we're gonna take this, open it up, and over here you have a hook. And get that hook behind the cable, and then like that. And you're gonna grab your shoes. All right, so you have this little hook here, and this little hook here. Those are gonna go into the sides of that piece you just put in. And I'm gonna do them one at a time here, because the big spring on the bottom is a little difficult to do. It's gotta come in through here, making sure that you're still hooked up in the right place. I like to actually do it like this and stretch the spring rather than fumble with the spring after. And then start pulling this guy down into place. Use some assistance from some tools you got. Watch your fingers when you do stuff like this, because springs will get you. Alright, let's try that again. Let's try a screwdriver. If I can like find a place to grab from. Alright, like that. So now this is in the right spot there, this is in the right spot there, springs under tension. Now we can start messing around at the top. So up top, we're going to first put our upper spring in, because this is the biggest pain. Okay. And then we're going to put our little dial in, goes this way. So again, we got a lot of stuff going on here. When it comes to spring tension, so we got to find a way to fit this in on an angle and then set the angle straight after. Easier said than done. Find this easier than messing around with the springs after. Well, not too quickly. Let's actually close this up completely. Make it as short as possible. There we go. So that's how that goes in. It's tough because you kind of have to manhandle it. You have to put some arm into it, but like getting your fingers into there, if something goes wrong, you're running the risk of jamming your fingers. So you kind of want to use tools, but it's easier by hand. Kind of a catch-22. All right, next we're putting these in, and these just go through the bracket into the shield behind. You can see the little place it goes in. Quarter turn. Here's another 5mm, and these are under spring tension too. So you go in first, up and down. Maybe do this side first. Keep your eye on it. Make sure it's in. And then we're gonna go do the other side, same thing. Perfect. You can kind of see behind it. There we go. You can hear when it locks in. And then just quarter turn. All right, should be like that. Yep, just like that. All right, so now we're all set there. We can grab our rotor. I'm just gonna quickly clean up this hub, make sure it's nice and clean before we put a new rotor on, so let me go do that quick. Next, we're just gonna clean everything up now. Brake parts cleaner rarely gets used on brake parts, but for once we're doing it. All right, cool. Let that dry off, and then we're gonna fit our new rotor. All right, so now we're gonna fit our rotor and adjust our parking brake. So first thing I'm gonna do is get it on, center it up a little bit, and take it off. And this side's a little bit easier than the passenger side because you actually get to use the hub for like leverage. So we're just gonna turn this out a few turns. Right about there, and fit it again. Feel a little loose, so we're gonna keep going. Keep going. All right, keep going. Should be somewhere around here. All right, so see right there, I have some resistance. So I'm gonna take this back off. I'm gonna go back down a couple turns. So right there, I'm happy with it. I'll line it up, put our screw back in. This one is a 6. They're nice and tight. All right, we took the caliper off on camera in one piece, but since we ended up deciding to do pads and rotors, I went off camera and took the caliper apart. So right now you just put the caliper back together, so the two 16 millimeters in the back, so we'll show you how to do that quick.
All right, so we're just gonna put the caliper back here, in our case the bracket, and just get those two 16 millimeter screws back in. All right, and 16 millimeter, we'll tighten those up.
All right, and now they get torqued to 110 newton meters. All right, so I'm not gonna be able to get that one without an extension. So we're gonna put an extension on it and go from back here. Perfect. And now we're gonna put the rest of the caliper together. All right, we're just gonna take our caliper and slide it back on, like that. Then we're gonna take our sliders, put them in. Ours are just greased because they're new. So now it's a 7 millimeter hex. Get these guys in. Okay. And now they get torqued to 35 newton meters plus or minus 3 newton meters. We're just gonna go with 35. Probably gonna be the same thing here where we have to come in from the back with an extension. All right, and now we can put our caps back on. All right, next we're gonna reinstall this clip. And again, if you guys just remove the caliper as a whole, you don't have to do any of that, but that's just us catching up. All right, so now that we have this here, what we're gonna do is actually take our chisel and we're gonna put it in between the fins, like here, but in between the center of the caliper, and that's gonna hold the chisel here so that this whole axle can't move, and we can go tighten up those Torx bolts from our axle to our differential. All right, so we're gonna start by taking our chisel, we're gonna put it right up in here so that the rotor can't turn up or down. All right, so now we're gonna torque these up. We'll go to 70 newton meters. So as I tighten now, I'm just gonna mark them so I know that they're torqued. All right, so now we can take the chisel out, move these up a little bit more. Right there, put the chisel back in. I was using a 14 this whole time, it's actually 12. I just realized. So I went and got 12 so it fits a little better. Yeah, it feels way tighter with the 12. Half of them done. I'm gonna move this back down. Over torqued by 2, that's fine. And then the last one. Alright, and I'm just gonna double check that first one. Alright. All set. Gonna mark that last one. Right, and there we go. Now we can go back out to the outside and finish up tightening our control arms. All right, so we're setting up our transmission jack underneath our shock and spring on this control arm, or the lower, I think that's the camera arm. And I'm gonna try to get the knuckle in here. And what we're doing is getting the suspension preloaded. We're gonna watch our lift and make sure that the car's not lifting up off of it. And we're just gonna get this into normal position so that when we torque it, everything's where it's supposed to be. You can do this with jacks. You can do this on the ground with wheels on it if you have blocks to put the car on. And you can use a tall boy or like a bobble jack kind of jack. Like right about there, it's gonna go off the lift. All right, something like there is gonna be our normal driving position. So we're gonna start with this one up top. The one up top is gonna be 100 newton meters and then 90 degrees. All right, we're gonna get the 100 newton meters first. I think this one's simply titled upper control arm. All right, 100 newton meters right on the nose. And now I gotta do 90 degrees, secondary torque.
So that one's done. Moving on. All right, so this one is titled trailing arm. And we're gonna just put this one to 100 Newton meters. This one does not get the secondary torque, but again, should be done in normal position. All right, just like that. That one's finished. All right, so when you're looking at torque specs, you're gonna find that upper one under control arm, under torque specs, is titled wishbone. So the top one's the wishbone. The middle one right here is the control arm. That's the one we're gonna do right now. The bottom one's the trailing arm, and then you have the toe arm and the camber arm. So camber arm, toe arm, I think. So that's how you're gonna look up specs if you're looking at like a car maybe that's slightly different. But we're gonna do the control arm now, which is the one behind the sway bar. And this one's gonna get the same 100 Newton meters and then 90 degrees. Alright, now we're just gonna set torque wrench to 90 degrees. Alright, so with that arm we actually replaced it. So we have to torque up the bolt where it mounts to the subframe as well. And that's gonna go to 100 Newton meters. Alright, so since we replaced this control arm, we're just gonna torque it to 100 Newton meters. Little turns, but we'll get there. Perfect. So now we're gonna do the toe arm to the steering knuckles. So this is 18 millimeters, and it's only gonna go 100 Newton meters on this one. No 90 degrees. There we go. All right, last we have to do the camber arm. I'm just tightening it first. So 21 millimeter. I have a wrench on the other side. All right, now we're gonna torque it to 165 Newton meters. All right, just like that. All right, so now that all our control arms are torqued somewhat under load, we're gonna loosen the load. And I'm pretty sure the last thing we have to do is just reconnect the sway bar end link, double check everything, and then we can go take it for a test drive. All right, you might have noticed that we had our end link accidentally flipped, so we just went and flipped it back. So we're gonna put it back into our sway bar on this side. We're gonna go to the bottom there, tighten up that 13. Not much room to get to this. All right, we're gonna put our 16 millimeter nut back on. I'm just gonna get the vice grips again. Make sure you have it on good. And then we can just tighten it with the 16 mil wrench. All right, and we're just gonna go until that's tight. Last thing we have to do is go back and tighten up our two 10 millimeters on our sway bar where it mounts to the subframe. We'll start with the top one. Okay, on the bottom one. All right, now we're just gonna go double check everything. All right, we know the axle's good, we know the sway bar is good, we know the end link's good. Upper control arm, or wishbone, control arm, trailing arm. We did the control arm on the inside as well. We did the camber arm, the toe arm. Brake caliper is good. Parking brake is good. Our little bolt here can be torqued to 16 Newton meters if you want. We have our sensor in. I think we're all set. So let's get the wheel back on, torque that up, and take it for a test drive. All right, so we just put the wheel back on. Let's go back inside and see if it still has a bearing issue. All right, so besides a little bit of interference from that busted brake dust shield, which we're just gonna knock back real quick, or try to drive it out. Sounds like our wheel bearing issue is gone, so let's go take it on an actual test drive. All right, so we're in the car, and by about 20 miles an hour before, I was definitely able to hear that wheel bearing drawn, and it was like intolerable. You couldn't be in the car with it. So, I mean, I'm already at 40 and it's gone. So, that noise was definitely the wheel bearing, luckily not the diff or the transfer case or, you know, the something else within the drivetrain. So it kind of killed two birds with one stone. It's inconvenient that you couldn't access just the wheel bearing, but also that had to kind of be taken care of. So doing it the way we did it is kind of the cheapest and easiest way, I'd say, to replace that. And, you know, we found out there was that bad control arm in there while we were there, so all said and done, it wasn't too too heavy of a repair, and the results are definitely phenomenal. So I'm really happy with it. Hopefully we don't have to do it on the other side anytime soon.